everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to the channel. I am here today with another book review, and this time I'm talking about a middle grade series. So this is Animorphs #1, The Invasion, written by K.A. Applegate. So this book series is one that was new in 1996, so I was 10 years old, and I have been wanting to dive into this series ever since it was new. I remember back when it was Goosebumps, which I was a big fan of, and Animorphs, which I always wanted my parents to buy me. So at those Scholastic book fairs during elementary school, and let me know if you remember those were classic. I loved those so much. I would always have my parents buy me Goosebump books, and then eventually Animorphs books once these came out, because the covers looked interesting and just the story sounded like something I'd enjoy. So through the years, I ended up reading, a good handful of those Goosebump books. I had them by me, but I never once read an Animorphs book. So for the first time, all these years later, I've been wanting to read it for that long, I finally decided, you know what? Now's the time. So growing up, I ended up getting rid of all the Animorphs books I had, donating them to thrift stores and whatnot. But I decided to start picking these up again because I started finding them at Goodwills. And so I picked them up, and now I have a very hefty Animorphs collection. It's nowhere near complete, but it's doing pretty well, especially for finding all these books secondhand. So I have the first 8 or 9 or so, maybe a bit more than that, and then I have some later on in the series as well. So I figured, I've started #1, work my way through, see how far I can get before I kind of burn out on the series. So now that I've read Animorphs #1, what did I think of The Invasion? Well, let's dive right in. I will say before I dive into the summary of this that this will be a spoiler-free review of The Invasion, so if you've not read it and care about spoilers, you can continue watching this without fear of it being spoiled for you. So this is a spoiler-free review. At its core, The Invasion is an alien invasion story, as you might expect, but it's told through the lens of 5 young kids. So we have Jake, Tobias, Marco, Rachel, and Cassie. And this group of friends they're making their way home after spending some time at the arcade after school one night, and they decide to take their usual shortcut through an abandoned construction site. And of course, their parents don't want them to take that, but that's neither here nor there. So they go through this construction site. On the way through it, they see these lights in the sky. So they start following them, and then they realize, wow, this is a UFO. What is this? Well, as it lands, they come to realize that they are watching an alien spacecraft or looking at an alien spacecraft. And that's scary enough. But then once the alien inside, which is this like blue hybrid of a horse mixed with a man, things get even crazier. And then it turns out that he can even read their minds. So this night just went from ordinary to anything but in a matter of minutes. So this is the origin story of how these kids get the ability to morph into animals, hence Animorphs, the title of the series. And the main plot that we're following here is that there are already aliens on Earth, and they have already started to take over this small town where these kids live. And so they need to figure out a way to stop it if they can. And so that's really the through line that we're following, at least in this first story. This is really Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but told from a middle grade perspective with some extra elements added in, of course. Specifically, in this book, we are following the main character of Jake, who is pictured on the cover here. And he suspects that his older brother, someone who he's recently lost touch with, which could be because he's turned into an alien, or could just be because he's getting older. His older brother is in high school and growing apart. And so we're trying to figure out, 1, is his brother an alien or not? And 2, how are they going to stop what they do know as aliens taking over these people's bodies? How are they going to stop that from happening so that they are not able to take over not only the city that they're in, but eventually the whole world? So this book does have a very large scope to it, but it does have a very narrow lens. It's very focused on these 5 characters, this town, and then some adult characters thrown in there just to help drive the story forward as well. The genre middle grade book I've read in the past has typically been horror. I've never read any science fiction middle grade, which of course, when you get to Goosebumps, which is the middle grade series I spent the most time with, obviously there are sci-fi elements to some of those stories, but at its core, at its heart, it really is a horror middle grade series. So I didn't know what to expect when it came to how Applegate would handle the sci-fi genre with a middle grade audience in mind, but I thought she did a remarkable job of sticking true to some of the elements you would come to expect from a middle grade series while amplifying some of those. She does really well amplifying the stressors that these characters would go through and keeping the urgency of the situation of being a 12, 13-year-old child in this situation that is way over your head, that you have no, you don't deserve to be in this situation. That's what I'm trying to say. This is much too much for anyone in that age range. So I think she did a really good job of not talking down to the reader, which you can get sometimes in middle grade books. Instead, like I said, she really just does a great job of making everything urgent and important while still keeping that sensibility of this is a middle grade work, so obviously it has a very distinct audience. I think she did a wonderful job with that. It's really interesting because Marco is basically the voice of reason for this group of 5. He just wants to let it be. Just move on with his life. Let him be a kid. Just keep on going. But the other 4 kind of see the bigger picture and try to push him in a different direction. So though he is the voice of reason, he has these other, 4 people saying, look at the bigger picture. Think about what can happen if we don't do this. And so that obviously drives his decisions, but it really helps bring depth to Marco's character using this kind of struggle between what makes sense and what's best for, in this case, the town or the world. Really, though, all of these characters have a surprising amount of depth to them, some more than others. I think, for example, Tobias is probably the most well-rounded character and because of it, the most interesting. He has a different background than these other 4 characters, and because of that, his actions are different than these other characters. So not only does Applegate write in an interesting backstory, but she uses it to help drive the plot forward, which I think is just so smart and really a mark of great writing. Like, who cares if, his backstory is X, Y, and Z if it has no factor in the story that you're currently reading? So I think that was really well done. And more importantly is that I feel like the other 4 characters are hip to it. They are privy to the idea that his life is different than theirs. And that is what is causing him to make some of the decisions he makes. And so because of that knowledge or awareness, it makes these characters feel a little bit wiser than their age might suggest, which I really enjoyed. Going back to Jake, and something I loved about reading this from his point of view was his relationship with Cassie. So Cassie is Rachel's best friend, and Rachel is Jake's cousin. So Jake and Cassie, I believe they have a crush on each other, but specifically we know that Jake has a crush on Cassie. And the way that Applegate builds this is never silly. It feels realistic, and because of that, it was enjoyable. It was very cute and very sweet. The other thing I want to mention is that this book was written in the mid-90s. All of the other middle grade that I've read from that era, and even more recent, has not had any interracial relationships, and that's what exactly is introduced here. So awesome for Applegate to introduce that back in the 90s when it's kind of something that we get a lot of today is diversity. And not only do we get diversity in the characters themselves, but also in the relationships, which is really cool to see. I think that diversity amongst characters and relationships is probably, it's incredibly important, but for the middle grade target audience, it's probably the most important just because you are still developing so many of those ideas as you're growing up. And so having this diverse cast of characters and this diverse relationship is excellent, and good on Applegate for including it in here. I really enjoyed it. Applegate does a really great job of establishing this world of the Animorphs that will eventually span, in the main series, I believe it's 54 books, and then a handful of other spin-off titles. This is just a gigantic universe to get into, and I'm so glad I finally did. After 25 years, I finally have dove in to the Animorphs books, and I am very happy that I did. So I'm going to give Animorphs #1, The Invasion, written by K.A. Applegate, 4 out of 5 stars. All right, so that's going to do it for my review of Animorphs #1. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I do want to review through this series as I read it, and like I mentioned, in May, I'm really hoping to finish The Visitor, which is the second book in that series, so check back sometime in June to see my review for that book, assuming I get through it as planned. Let me know down in the comments below if you are a fan of the Animorphs series, And if so, how was book number 1 to you? Was it better than the rest, or does it go downhill from here? Let me know down in the comments below, but please keep it spoiler free for not only my sake, but the sake of all of my other commenters as well. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video and you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so. It really helps me out. If not, thank you anyway for watching. I really appreciate it. All right, guys, so that's going to do it for today. As always, I want to say thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.